My name is Vanessa, and for a long time, I carried all the guilt on my back. I believed, word for word, that the problem was me. But as he tried to fix me, the narcissist took me apart, silently, slowly, until I no longer knew who I was. In the beginning, the narcissist said that I was sweet, intense, unique. He said he had never met someone with so much dedication. I felt alive next to him, as if someone finally saw what had always been hidden in me. But little by little, that charm turned into criticism. When I spoke enthusiastically, he would say, "You talk too much." When I showed affection, he sighed, "Everything turns into drama with you." When I said I was tired, he would ask, "Tired of what? You don't even work that hard." And I started to believe. I began to think that maybe I was really too sensitive, that my way of loving was exaggerated, that my effort to please was suffocating. But little by little, this became a psychological oppression, and that's when he started molding me, as if I were a sculptor tinkering with something that was never good enough. I began to review each word before speaking, to swallow her tears so as not to make a scene, smiling unwillingly, just to keep the mood light. And he, the narcissist, always with that air of controlling tranquility, would say, "Vanessa, you need to be more rational. That way you scare anyone away." That's when I realized he didn't want who I was. He wanted what was left after I annulled myself. And the cruelest thing is that he did it as if he was helping me, as if correcting me was a favor, as if turning off my shine was the price to pay for his love. There was a day when I commented with a little sadness that I missed going out, seeing my friends. He smiled and said, "It's just that you always need attention, right? I'm more reserved. I think you should learn that." That hurt more than any scream, because the narcissist doesn't scream. He whispers. He suggests. He exonerates cruelty with sweet words and calm eyes. And you start to question yourself. Am I really that hard to love? Do I demand too much? Do I need to change? While I was asking myself these questions, he fed on my doubt. And that's how, very slowly, he destroyed me. But a part of me, even bruised, even silent, still whispered back, "Vanessa, it's not you. You're not the problem." I just wasn't ready to listen. Not yet. Gradually, I realized that what made me a problem was precisely my ability to feel, to care, to be complete. Over time, Vanessa began to notice a pattern. Every time she felt strong, expressive, or demanded respect, he would murmur something that made that feeling unconscious. Something subtle, but devastating. "You're exaggerating. I just wish it was more peaceful." And she kept silent, as if she needed awakeners all morning to remember who she was. Guilt was installed imperceptibly. She began to apologize for everything, for talking too much, for complaining, for remembering. He said it was just civility and concern, but it was control disguised as care. This form of abuse, emotional but surreptitiously continued, has effects as profound as physical abuse. It can cause anxiety, depression, trauma, and low self-esteem. Vanessa started to hide her cell phone when she was online with her friends. He felt ashamed to talk about his problems. Any external doubt seemed a sign of weakness. And when she said, "I'm confused," she heard in silence, "Of course you are. I told you that sometimes you overdo things." This systematic denial of emotions and perceptions is a classic gaslighting tactic. Her emotional instability became so latent that her mind went into survival mode. She reviewed conversations, recalled lines, distrusted her own pulse. Studies show that gaslighting victims report symptoms such as hypervigilance, emotional fatigue, difficulty trusting themselves and others. These are real signs of psychological trauma. Vanessa remembered happy days, a sunset, a joke between friends, a moment of genuine affection, and tried to recover these fragments. But the narcissist used this vulnerability. "You're very dramatic for that, right? It lives according to a feeling," and she gave up. He was silent. The greatest pain was realizing that he not only diminished her, he isolated her. Studies show that chronic emotional abuse erodes self-esteem, promotes isolation, and hurts mental health deeply. Therapy and counseling. And the more he did that, the harder it was for her to seek help. But one day, reading by chance about the effects of this type of manipulation, Vanessa found clarity. Gaslighting can indeed generate distortion of reality, leading the victim to question sanity, perceptions, feelings. She felt a knot unravel. She wasn't going crazy. I was being manipulated. Validation has become a turning point. She began writing diaries, jotting down speeches and memories, a ransom board to emerge. This simple act is already a proven step in gaslighting recovery. Recording daily life helps to reconnect with the truth and trust one's own perception, and the cycle was reversed. When he repeated a distortion that never happened, she, for the first time, resisted. I know it happened. I have records. His look was startled. The mask has fallen, and she realized that she still had a voice. It was the beginning of the reversal, not with explosion, but with firmness, with truth. She no longer needed to prove anything to those who didn't want love. She needed to prove herself to herself. It was when I stopped apologizing for feeling that he began to realize that he no longer controlled me as he used to. I remember the first time I managed to keep my gaze steady after another one of his lines. "You're making it up again. You distort everything." But that day, I didn't cry. I didn't beg. I didn't question it. I just said, "You can repeat this to yourself 1,000 times. But this time, I know it's not me." The voice did not come out loud. It came out firm. It came out of the part of me that had been silenced for so long. And I saw it on his face. That slight discomfort of someone who knows he is starting to lose control. From then on, everything changed. Not magically, but like a door that opens after years of locking. I began to notice every detail. The looks that used to leave me groundless no longer paralyzed me. The silences that made me doubt my sanity were now just silence. And most importantly, I started to come back to myself. It was a slow, painful return. I had to relearn myself. I had to rediscover what I liked to eat without him criticizing. I had to remember which songs touched me before he said they were childish. I had to reconnect with friends he pushed me away with comments like, "I think they're kind of immature, they have nothing to do with you." And I believed it. Because the narcissist never tells you to cut ties directly. He poisons you little by little, planting distrust, semillando critica, until you, on your own, isolate yourself. But now, I was back. Coming back was like entering an old house, covered in dust, but full of memories. I cleaned space by space, with affection, with patience, with pain too. There were days when I missed him, not what he did, but the illusion he sold. From affection before criticism, of touch before guilt, give attention before erasure. And on those days, I hugged each other. I cried everything I couldn't cry while I was with him. Because there, every tear turned into ammunition. See how you are too emotional? Today, every tear of mine is a manifesto. It's the body saying, "You're alive. You feel it. You matter." And in this process of coming back to myself, I realized that he wasn't cruel because he didn't know how to love. He was cruel because he knew exactly what he was doing. Because every time I bent over, he smiled. Every time I gave in, he grew. And when I started to come back, he got lost. He tried to go back. Of course he tried. With messages like, "I miss you. You were the only one who understood me. No one will love you like I did." But I already knew that script. I already knew that his love was a veiled contract. I love you, as long as you erase yourself for me. And this time, I answered with silence. A silence of mine, of strength, of liberation. The same tool he used to punish me was now my weapon of peace. I didn't need words to explain myself anymore. I didn't owe any more justification. Because now, finally, Vanessa was back. Whole, shattered perhaps, but real shattered. And with those pieces I started to rebuild myself. One truth at a time, one day at a time. Because in the end, all I needed was not for him to change. It was for me to believe in myself again. And now, I believe. I feel it. I exist. And no one else will destroy me little by little. Never again. Never again. Because now I know that my worth is not conditional on anyone's emotional availability, least of all their approval. It was at that moment that something inside me, so faint, shone again. And I knew, this light is mine, and it will guide me. I started talking to myself. Not that low, doubtful voice, but the one loaded with truth. You deserve to feel safe. You deserve to exist in one piece. And for the first time, that voice didn't come with guilt or question. It came with determination. In his place, I thought of a network of friends, a network of therapists, a network of old memories that have never been erased. I went back to writing notes, messages to myself, all the mentions of strength, of existence, of "you're not crazy." They became my fuel. I started to mark on the calendar the days when I felt whole again. Each day was a reminder that I was managing, little by little, to pull myself together. Real beauty, imperfect, but whole. And when something nice happened, like laughing without looking to the side to see if he was paying attention, I would take a deep breath and say, "Yes, that's me again." One day, I wore a dress that he criticized, put on loud music and danced alone in the living room, not to celebrate victory, to tell myself that my body remains my territory, and I inhabit it again, with pleasure. Other times, he cried in silence. He tried to ignore me, calm me down, whispered that everything was okay, that it still hurt. And that's okay, because emotional restorations take time, and no one overcomes a complex wound in a hurry. But he was no longer silent. When someone asked if everything was okay, I would breathe and answer, "I'm rebuilding." That sounded strange to someone else, but to me it was the most absolute truth. And he tried to come back, disguised as care, as a souvenir, but this time I wasn't even wrong. The reunion with my voice was so deep that I didn't even hear what came after that half-word request. I just thought, I'm somewhere else now, a place he doesn't access anymore. The worst of the violence was not what he did to me. It was erasing me without locks, silencing me with compliments. But he did not do it completely. It failed fundamentally. It made me disbelieve myself for a while, but it didn't destroy me. Today, when I look in the mirror, I don't see who he wanted. I see who I chose to be, someone who doesn't disappear, who does not remain silent in the face of doubt, that does not exchange authenticity for acceptance. A woman who went through invisible hells and came out alive, and he felt it again. So, if you are in that place of doubt, confusion, suffocating guilt, breathe. You listen. Even if it's been absent for years, your truth is waiting to be heard, not in the words he said, but in the words you can still feel. It is there that his reconstruction begins, and this time, with the whole of you, surviving only with your truth, and determined never to be erased. I never apologized for existing again, because today I know that what silenced me was the narcissist's gaslighting, not my intensity. The cycle always started again with a compliment. "You're so intense," but that can become loaded. It seemed careful, but it was manipulation. Each compliment was a trap for me to neglect myself, for me to believe that the excess was mine, not the emotional void it left. So, I decided to offer myself the listening that he never gave me, listening to my own perception. When I felt that I was being controlled, I didn't accuse myself anymore. He breathed and said, "This is emotional abuse. That's gaslighting disguised as worry." Did I need constant emotional correction so as not to break the relationship? No, I needed myself. Every time I said something without a filter, he said that I exalted myself. Every time I kept something, I said I was cold. And I destroyed myself little by little with this unequal dance. But I discovered that this was not love. It was control. One day, after a poisonous phrase whispered with controlled affection, I wrote in the mirror, "You're not the problem, Vanessa. You have been manipulated." The word manipulated set me free. He didn't need to explain anything. He just needed to believe. That's when I laid out my emotional escape plan. Nightly notes, all the phrases, all the insights he remembered. Friends as mirrors of my truth, partners of my clarity. Intensive therapy, returning my gaze inwards, away from emotional control. And slowly, each pillar supported me. The emotional reconstruction, although time-consuming, began to give me back my confidence. The small moments of freedom, like the time I smiled without fear, just by listening to a song that was mine, were bridges to get out of the fog of emotional abuse. And when he tried to reappear with disguised promises of change, I didn't even listen. I didn't even grumble. I just breathed. He no longer accessed my world. Today, taking my place means retaining powerful buzzwords: narcissistic, gaslighting, emotional control, but above all, reconstruction. If this resonates with you, who may still be trying to justify yourself to those who never valued you, breathe. Listen. You weren't the problem. You have been manipulated, and yet, you are light, and you are coming back. I am here. What about you? I discovered that recovering from gaslighting is not about erasing the past. It is about sewing new meanings with the shards of who I was. The feeling of reconstruction did not come with fires. It came with small gestures that sprang from the need to find myself again, like looking at my phone without reviewing the latest conversations to make sure I had said everything right, how to wake up without fear of his tone of voice the next day, like laughing alone at my favorite song, without testing the air before breathing. These were the moments when my soul found peace again. Emotional reconstruction is not magic. It is insistence. It is affection. It's saying to yourself every day, you deserve to exist calmly, without suspense, without threat. I researched, read books, and research on recovery model. I understood that healing begins when you become your own expert, when you learn to read your own signals, understand your triggers, identify your survival strategies, and create new ways of existing with safety and meaning. Talkspace. Tcom 3. Women, UNM. Edu +3 Teen Vogue. +3. I learned to name emotional abuse at last. Instead of blaming myself for being fragile, I recognized that emotional control that I believed was my mistake. It was his manipulation. The narcissist, master of concealment, molded me by silence, guilt, gaslighting disguised as reason. And for a long time I carried my insecurities as proof of fragility, but it wasn't weakness. It was survival. So I created my covenant with herself. Welcome without haste. Defend without guilt. Exist without fear. I began to delineate my boundaries clearly. No, not today, with no explanation or justification. I stopped apologizing for feeling. A friend told me, "Your voice is back," and smiles, because she had returned, soft but firm. The impact on my heart was as real as the mark that the abuse left. Anxiety, deep sadness, sleepless nights, tense body, as if he was still together. This is real. Psychological trauma has physical symptoms, such as insomnia, migraine, muscle tension, extreme tiredness, medical news today. But so is the cure. A conversation with friends, therapy, quiet time of my own, a guilt-free coffee. All of this was giving me back something that I have been naming as my essence: reconstruction. If one day his voice comes back in echoes, "You've always been too intense. Now I listen and answer in thought." Intense is living. This intensity of mine does not need to be tamed. It needs to be welcomed. We are talking about the truth here. If you feel this way, tired of being accused of existing, confused by questioning her own sanity, alone even with herself, breathe. You're not crazy. You have been a victim of gaslighting. You deserve to rebuild yourself. And when you start to get back on your feet, even though you still feel the weight of history, remember, there is life after the mist. There is freedom after guilt. And you can get there. Because like me, I simply recognized myself again. That's it. It is reconstruction. Rebuilding myself does not mean that the abuse has disappeared. It means that even with scars, I see myself again. And this is the greatest form of freedom. The reconstruction phase arrived accompanied by an impressive shock. I realized that life no longer needed to be ruled by fear. My heart didn't have to beat on constant alert. I no longer needed to anticipate anyone's moods to survive, especially not those of the narcissist who said I was the problem. I decided to silence internal criticism. I stopped reviewing my own feelings for fear of seeming dramatic, too sensitive. Instead, I began to look inward tenderly. When I felt anxious, I allowed myself to pause. When I felt like crying, I cried courageously. When I found myself alone with confused thoughts, she welcomed me as a friend. And little by little, my mind found peace. Not absolute peace, but the peace that is born of self-respect. Along the way, I reconnected with people who had previously been pushed away by him under the excuse of my supposed instability. But the real instability was his, always shifting the center of the world to the place where only he mattered. I went back to talking about my projects, about my dreams. I started dreaming again without wondering if I was too daring. I went back to wearing strong colors, writing, reading, laughing without needing permission. All of this was reconstruction. Simple, intimate, powerful. And that's when I understood that it's not about overcoming abuse. It's about learning to live with what happened. Remembering, yes, but choosing not to let it define me. My scars are part of me, not what limits me. For those who are still deep in the pain, doubting their sanity because of this emotional abuse. I know how it hurts. But here's the most radical truth of all. You don't have to prove that you're fine. You just need to allow yourself to be you, with clarity, with courage, with truth. That's it. It already heals. The narrator stayed behind, because the reconstruction, the liberation, began internally. And finally, the narcissist from within no longer has control. Unlike him, I choose to live authentically, and you can too. Deciding to rebuild myself was more than an act of courage. It was an act of self-love that words can't capture. Mornings now taste different. I wake up hearing my breathing, no longer reacting to it. I don't review the day before for fear of the tone of my voice or, why didn't I say that right? I get up, I prepare, and I choose what nourishes me, without judgment, without guilt. The peace I seek today is not empty silence, but authentic presence. I don't need the world to understand me, because I understand myself. When I look in the mirror, I see someone who has been silenced, manipulated, confused, but who relearned to listen to themselves. And that is enough to warm the heart. The scars are there, but now they are emblems of survival, not weakness. Scars that remind me that emotional reconstruction is possible, because I am living proof of it. I persisted after being destroyed little by little. I rebuilt myself when everything seemed dissolved. And that's what reconstruction is all about. Persisting even when you don't see a way. For you who are there, feeling the weight of doubt, listen with an open heart. The problem was never you. You were the victim of emotional abuse, gaslighting, control. But you can be reborn. It can rebuild itself. And it can be whole. Again, this story of Vanessa is your story too. And the chapter that begins now is not about surviving the manipulation of a narcissist. It's about finding your light, your voice, your path. I don't know if this is the end of the journey, but I know it's a real new beginning. And in the silence, I choose now. There is life, my life. And it was there, in that post-escape silence, that I realized that rebuilding was not about going back. It was about being reborn with one's own light. The first days were full of estrangement. It felt like I inhabited another universe, one where my heart no longer needed to beat on alert, and my mind didn't need to anticipate every reaction to avoid being punished. The instability was born from the constant tension that emotional abuse causes. Anxiety, depression, low self-esteem, all inflated by the narcissist's manipulation, very well mind +1. And what hurt the most was believing that it was all my fault. But the rebirth began with something simple. Breathe, Vanessa. No applause. No forced happy ending. Only breathing that heals. I understood that I needed to heal myself by speaking my truth. I began to write down everything I felt. Phrases, sensations, small victories. Why validating my own voice against gaslighting is an act of power therapy with AB Medium. I talked to friends who didn't silence my feelings. Therapy became a safe haven. These networks reminded me of what the narcissist tried to erase, my ability to feel, to remember, to exist as a whole woman. Day after day, I realized, reconstruction is not about erasing pain. It is about welcoming it and moving on. The physical and mental symptoms didn't disappear overnight. Insomnia, throbbing memories, fear of trusting again. These are real marks of psychological abuse Charlie Health very well mind. But that doesn't mean I can't take a step, or a sigh, out of this story. And when I realized that my intensity was strength, not defect, that my sensibility was a gift, not baggage, that my self-love was resistance, then it was right. The gear was completed. Recognize emotional abuse. Name gaslighting. To raise my limit, word for word. And to believe that, despite the pain, I still deserve to live for myself. If you who follow this story fit into this, know that you are not alone. You're not the problem. You have been manipulated. And yet, you are alive. Today, my freedom is this: to be whole, to feel without having to apologize, be vulnerable without fear, and above all, to always belong to me, regardless of anyone. That's it. It is reconstruction. Reconstruction. That word now rings in me as a warning of peace. This new beginning that I live is not about erasing what has passed, but about honoring what still pulsates inside me, even if it still causes pain. Because getting out of a harmful relationship with a narcissist isn't just about physically leaving. It is to rebuild emotionally. It is learning to breathe again without justifying yourself. The emotional abuse, these invisible chains of gaslighting, of emotional control disguised as affection, all of this made me aware that the freedom I seek today is internal and eternal. It's a commitment to my emotions, my rhythm, my limits. And even though the world sometimes tells me that I'm exaggerated, too sensitive, intense, my answer is simple. I feel it. I feel everything. It's my superpower. There is no more room to accept silences that hurt. There is no more room to punish yourself for existing with authenticity. Reconstruction is my sacred territory. It is where the woman who has been silenced makes herself heard. Loud, clear, true. Finally, if you follow this story, know what I know. The problem was never you. You've been facing emotional abuse, but it was strong enough to return to the light. And so, I leave you with this restorative view. Until the end, she does not give up on herself. And that's the power of reconstruction. Until the end, she doesn't give up on herself. That phrase now lives on as a silent mantra in me. Because reconstruction isn't just about healing. It's about renouncing that toxic cycle in which you always blamed yourself for loving too much. It's learning to love without having to adapt everything on the other side. Today, my self-love does not fit in pages or applause. He fits into the silence I choose. Silence that fills without suffocating. He lives in the peace I call normal, making decisions without having to ask permission. Not smiling just to please. Not fitting in where I don't fit. The pain still exists. On sporadic days. Sensations that pull me into hidden memories. It's the sign that that old version of me still needs to be embraced. So I welcome it. Not as fragility, but as part of the path that brought me here. I look back with compassion. Not revenge, because I wasn't wrong. Just blinded by his manipulation, fueled by emotional abuse, gaslighting, and emotional control disguised as love. But I also return to the present clearly. This chapter, as difficult as it was, became the ground of my reconstruction. And if there's one question after all that, let it be this. What's stopping you from getting started? To say no to what silences you inside. To allow yourself to live without excuses, without forced adjustments, without fear of looking strong. If you hear this convinced that you are not crazy, and understand that you have been manipulated, then this is your moment. The rebuild was never about going back to being the same. It was about being reborn with the courage to be whole, finally free from needing to be understood by those who never wanted to see you. And here, the free, whole, wide open, and alive, I say goodbye, but not without looking you in the eyes and saying tenderly, you survived the worst, and what awaits you now? It's just real you, reintegrating, shining, loving without compromise. Every step I took to rebuild myself was rooted in courage, that courage to embrace what seemed impossible to me, my truth. Today, my journey is living proof that emotional abuse and gaslighting have invisible but healing scars. Rebuilding is not going back. It is being reborn, with awareness, with presence, with self-love. For a long time, I was diminished by the emotional control he exercised, barely disguised as care. But I realized that the power of reconstruction lies in recognizing this manipulation and reestablishing my own center. Studies show that recovery begins with recognition, firm boundaries, therapy, and a support network. Delicate but essential steps to regain self-esteem and regain oneself. Today, my feelings are validated by myself, no longer denied by manipulation. Every time I listen to myself, every time I make choices without having to justify myself, that's reconstruction. This reconstruction blossoms with compassion for me, not with haste or perfection. And for you who still resonate with this pain, who still wonder if it is exaggerated, unstable, too difficult, listen to this. You're not the problem. She was manipulated by emotional abuse, by the narcissist who turned her presence into a threat. But you survived, without even realizing it. You started to rebuild yourself. And in this new beginning, there is no going back to silence. There is no more room to erase. You have been reborn. And that simply, enough is enough. I returned home in silence. And to this day, I wonder how I let anyone convince me that love was pain. I still hear some of his words echoing in my mind. Not forcefully, but with that slow poison that the narcissist has always known how to distill. Things like, you have to get better. Or, no one will put up with someone like you for long. For a long time, these phrases were the soundtrack of my day. I woke up molding myself. I slept reproaching myself. And she was always trying to be what he wanted to be, without ever knowing exactly what it was. Now I know that it was never love. It was control. It was manipulation. It was emotional abuse with sweet perfume and calm smile. It was gaslighting in the form of worry. It was emotional control disguised as care. I disintegrated little by little, and I reconnected without haste. In my time, in my space, on my skin. Today, I don't see myself as a victim. I see myself as a woman who survived a minefield, where every step was guilt, every gesture was doubt, every silence was punishment. And when they ask me if I've overcome, I do not know. I just know that now I can hear myself again. And that, for me, is already the beginning of everything. I don't have all the answers yet, but for the first time, the questions are mine. That's it. It is already freedom.